Hello and welcome everyone to our webinar, What You Need to Know About Property Taxes. I'm really excited about today's presentation because it is the very first of this particular continuing education course that we are presenting today. So thank you all for being here. My name is Amanda Farrell. I work in the marketing department at PropLogix, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. Before I hand things off to our panelists today, I'm going to go over some really important information. If you are here for the continuing education credit, please be aware that only title agents and attorneys in the state of Florida are eligible for this continuing education credit. At this time, it's not approved for credit in other states. And in order to receive your credit, you must be attending the session live and for the entire duration. So if you are signed in and you are sharing a device with someone else, a colleague or a friend, please be sure that you are signed in to an individual email so that we can also confirm your attendance today. We'll also be sending out an email later today for title agents for you to fill out a form and to confirm that you were here today. We will be sending that off to the Department of Financial Services. So it is really important that you get that form and turn it back into us as soon as possible so that you get your credits in a timely manner. For attorneys, you will be reporting your credit to the Florida Bar website. I have the number for this course on the screen right now, but you will also be getting that follow-up email with that information. So if you don't get a chance to jot that down right now, don't worry, you will get that again later today. I also wanted to let everyone know that next week we're going to be having a Q&A session with Tom Cronkrite of Certified. We're going to be talking about cybersecurity. So if you have the chance, go to our website, to our webinars section on our website and sign up for that Q&A session for next week at 2 p.m. I'd love to see you all there as well. And we have a lot of content to go through today, so we're going to try and get through it as much as possible to make sure we get everything covered, but we will be opening it up to questions at the end. If we aren't able to get to your questions, I will go ahead and compile all of those and in an email and get people who have the knowledge to answer your questions, email you as soon as possible. So yeah, if you have any questions, be sure to just use that box in your control panel there. And that is all I have. So I will go ahead and turn things over to Mandy.
Thanks, Amanda. I certainly appreciate all of you joining us this afternoon. Super excited that you're here with us. And I have the pleasure of being a co-panelist today with Jacob Dean. Jacob is one of our super members of our team that assists us in doing all of the primary tax searches as part of the services that we offer. He has a lot of knowledge just based on the logistics of pulling the information and how to decipher the information once tax reports are generated. So Jacob, welcome, and thank you so much for being my co-pilot today. I'm looking forward to getting through this presentation with you.
Of course, thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Great, so let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be covering today. So this is a 60-minute live presentation. It's designed to provide general information on property taxes, the importance of doing thorough property research before either purchasing property or representing a buyer and seller in the transaction. So we're going to break down today's discussion into these categories. We're going to talk about the property tax system just in the United States, just a quick little, how did we get here and how did we, how the historical background of property taxes in general, the different types of tax liens that can be imposed on property, the trouble with finding the proper tax information, some of the key pieces of information you need to be looking for when doing tax searches, a title agent's role in discovering tax issues, And then we're going to talk just briefly just about some of the confusion in the language about what a tax certificate is versus tax deed certificates and tax lien certificates. So we'll get into a little bit more of that in detail. And then of course we'll wrap it up with an opportunity to answer any questions that you may have, and then certainly provide just the information, a post presentation that you will need to provide back to us in order to obtain your credits. So again, just the general overview, we're just going to get a greater understanding of the property taxes and the process of placing when property tax liens are placed on property, and of course the role of the title company in uncovering tax issues prior to closing. So just as a quick little background, so the property tax system in the United States, basically during the early American colonies, tax structure varied from state to state. Typically what we saw in the early days was certain local tax officials didn't necessarily think that taxing property based on the quantity of the property was correct. Some of them said, hey, listen, perhaps we should tax based on income that's generated as a result of being a property owner. Some also said that perhaps it was best to tax based on quality of the property versus quantity of the property. And then other states, of course, just indicated that there was no need to tax at all. So there was very little in the way of any kind of standardization, but it was then around the typically through the mid to early 1800s did it become apparent that all of the states would benefit if in fact they taxed the property owners based on the value of the property. So it's been in place now for several hundred years, and this is the system in which we use. And we'll talk a little bit about how taxes are actually assessed and how properties valuations are set as well. So who levies property taxes? So we know that typically, well, 99.9% of the time, property taxes are commonly levied at the municipal level or at the city or the county level, the local level where individuals own property. So cities, counties, school districts, community development districts, CDCs, we'll talk a little bit more in detail about the CDD forms of taxation, special taxing districts, villages, townships, other jurisdictions, governing jurisdictions, they all typically have the ability to tax, and typically is done at the local level. In doing a little bit of research, we looked and we said, hey, has there ever been a property taxation at the federal or at the national level? And Amanda, I believe, uncovered in doing some of her blog writing that in fact it has happened before, where the government at the United States national level has actually imposed property taxes, but only a handful of times, and typically that was done during war times to fund the Civil War, for instance. So not something that we see in today. These terms oftentimes get a little bit confusing when we're talking about the different types of taxes that you find on your tax report. So basically just black and white, ad valorem tax versus non-ad valorem tax. An ad valorem tax is basically an amount that is assessed based on the value of the transaction of the property. So this is your basic property tax line item that you will see on the tax report. Non-ad valorems are not necessarily taxes based on value. They really are more so considered special assessments or a way of imposing taxes based on the benefits for owning that particular property. So some examples of non-ad valorem taxes would be things such as taxes to pay for landscaping or security or lighting or trash disposal or some type of waste pickup. Jacob, I know that you look at tax records on a regular basis. Do you have some other different examples that you can share that you typically see?
Sure. I'm definitely willing to say that utilities are generally one of the most common things you're going to see in this category. Anything that is a utility service provided to the property that is not billed separately is going to be here. So if you're not getting a garbage bill, you're probably paying it on your property taxes. That is the case for a very large number of counties. It's very rarely separated. This can also apply to things like sewage. Maybe you pay for your water, but you do not pay a sewage bill specifically. That is also something that could be on a non-ad valorem item instead. Trash pickup is a great example. Mandy mentioned lighting, but to be a little bit more specific, it could be things like street lights. Like maybe you happen to live on a very well-lit part of your town, and the county decided that you need to pay a little extra in order to enjoy that privilege. That could be a special assessment that shows up. These are all included as non-ad valorem items. And just to clarify, you cannot just pay one of these whenever you pay property taxes. I'm sure that was not in question, but we have been asked that before whenever we report both of these, if they could be separated. Can we just pay the ad valorem property taxes? No, the county doesn't really care that they're separated. It all becomes the same tax bill in the end, usually.
Thanks, Jacob. So yeah, so there are some what we consider to be uncommon taxing authorities. So not necessarily the local city or county or township, but a community development district or a CDD district is some form of a taxing authority. Typically a CDD, as you all, I'm sure, especially in the state of Florida, this is not something that is uncommon, but they're put into place primarily by developers as a means to pay for all of the amenities that come with living within a community. And so typically it's found as a non-ad valorem tax item on the tax bill. Typically it's a set amount for that particular property owner over, say, 20 or 30 years. Basically as a way to recoup some of the money for the development without actually raising necessarily the value of the property to accommodate that tax. A special taxing district as well is it's only a portion, perhaps a small piece or community within the city whereby there is a special assessment where property owners in that particular area are going to benefit from some type of improvement to that area. So again, it's typically maybe listed as a special assessment. So it's very important, obviously, to look at a number of different locations, different places to find this information to make sure you're not missing the information. But again, it's for a specific project or improvement that has been approved by the local government that would require an increase in additional taxes to pay for the project. So how are property taxes calculated? So generally, property taxes are basically determined by multiplying the property tax rate or our millage rate to the actual valuation. So the actual property assessor is the one that will determine the actual value of a property, and they use different methods to come up with the valuation. And so we're highlighting 3 different ways in which the local assessor may actually use to calculate actual property value. The first being the sales evaluation. So this method assesses the property based on what it's likely to sell for in a transaction. Basically what they do is they'll compare it to like properties in the area, recently sold properties in the area based on location. They'll look at market conditions, the overall state of the property, any improvements that have been made to determine what that valuation is if it were to be sold. The other is the cost method. Another method involves the estimating of how much it would cost to replace anything on the property or the property itself. So this examines the depreciation of the property and the cost of building materials and labor at the time in the event that if it were to have to be built. So that's the cost method. And then the income method is another way in which the assessor may evaluate property. And this is looks at how much you could actually make from the property if it was rented. So they look at rental income, they look at expenses, they look at maintenance, they look at what it would cost for a management company to oversee the management of the property, insurance, taxes, things of this nature. So there's lots of ways in which the assessor can actually, impose what the projected value is of the property, and then that valuation calculated with whatever the millage rate is how the property taxes are actually calculated. So what do property taxes pay for? Well, so typically with property taxes being collected at the local level, most local municipalities, they have budget hearings. They look to see how much money or how much taxes are actually going to need to be collected to determine how the money is going to be allocated from one local service to the other. So things like education, libraries, local infrastructure, law enforcement, fire rescue, all of these are different local services that the communities basically have available to them for both safety and security, as well as enjoyment with parks and recreation, public transportation, things of this nature. And that property, the money that's collected, property taxes, goes to pay for these types of services that we all enjoy. So what happens when you don't pay your taxes? Well, typically what's going to happen is there's going to be a lien placed on the property. So taxing authorities across all three levels of government have the ability to actually impose liens on the property. At the federal level, things like your income tax, state level, state income tax, and local level typically is where your property taxes can actually have liens placed. So it's very important that in the event that taxes are not paid, that we the title agencies and real estate attorneys know that it's very important to do as much research as possible to uncover liens at all three levels of government. So federal tax liens primarily we see can cause a huge hiccup in a closing are IRS liens. So first and foremost, the IRS is going to basically lien on every single property that taxpayer owns or has the rights to, and it's going to be on there until those taxes are paid. And I know that in a lot of our research that we do on behalf of our clients, IRS liens can take forever to rectify. So, I mean, it can take 4, 5, 6 months sometimes in order to come to some type of agreement, whether it be that the individual come up with some type of a payment plan or some type of negotiation to structure paying back the liens. But this again is going to be a very lengthy and expensive way in which the incoming buyer can be held out on having the opportunity to purchase property due to these types of liens. States also file a lien on a home for unpaid individual income taxes as well. So very similar to the way the IRS or the federal government liens on the property for non-payment, state tax liens basically enable the state government to do the same. So extinguishing the lien will require payment or some other arrangement, again, in order for these liens to be removed. And then, of course, local tax liens are property taxes. Property taxes are collected at the county or the city level. And should the owner fall behind on their property taxes, their property will in fact be liened against. So we'll talk a little bit more about what happens in that regard.
Mandy, if you don't mind, I'd like to add one little note about local tax liens. It's worth noting that you should just automatically assume that property taxes at the local level are liened. There's virtually no instances where they are not. Where they're going to follow the previous owner instead of the home itself. They will virtually always stick with the property itself. That's one of the reasons we do so much research on specifically those kinds of taxes, because that's what we see the most of. They are liened by default I could not name a place where that is not the case. So that's why they're one of the most important things to be looked into whenever a home is changing hands. They can also be a very pricey thing to miss, obviously. If the previous owner has not paid their taxes for 3 years, I assure you the county has not forgotten that the previous owner has not paid their taxes for 3 years, and whoever owns that property later is going to have to pay it, obviously. So it's a very important thing to be sure of. It's safer to assume that they're going to be liened rather than inquiring about it and take care of it before any sort of closing is done.
Yes, thanks. And so that's basically a statutory lien that we're seeing here. That's basically what you're going to see. Voluntary liens like mortgages, home equity lines of credit, second mortgages, these are obviously liened on the property as well. And typically, to no surprise, obviously, to the person that owns the property. Involuntary liens, maybe not so much. It may be basically a lien that's been placed on the property due to some type of code enforcement violation. Utility companies that lien on property for unpaid utility bills would fall in this category as well. Judicial liens basically are liens that may be imposed as a result of some type of court action. Some type of like a judgment, child support, things of this nature, where it's actually been imposed by, by a judgment lien. And then here's two different ways in which liens can also be applied to property: general liens or specific liens. Kind of high level. I know Jacob can perhaps even describe this much more clearer than I, but this typically you see a difference in these types of general or specific liens for multifamily units, large condominium complexes, where if the developer or the investor, the owner of the overall building has liens, typically those liens are not going to necessarily be imposed on the specific unit owner of a condominium, and vice versa. So a specific lien on a unit owner of a condominium is not necessarily going to impact all residents that live within the main structure of the building. Anything you want to add there, Jacob, or was that?
No, man, you actually described it perfectly. That's the most common question we get about these too. We produce a lot of tax reports at PropLogix, and one thing we'll notice a lot is whenever we're researching a specific unit, this happens with our lien search product as well. When we're researching a particular unit in a condo or any sort of multi-parcel building, there will be the parcel that we're searching will be completely clear, but we conduct all of our searches by address as well. So it's very likely that we're going to find instances for maybe other units in this building or for the overall building itself. For the case of that single transaction, the parcel that we're researching, none of that is actually relevant. It will be relevant to whoever owns the overall building. So management company, investment firm, whoever owns this every single unit, they will be responsible for it at the end. But in the case of, unit A has a code violation or taxes are due and unit B does not, unit B will never have to pay for unit A's instances. So we generally do not include that in any of our tax reports for that reason. And it's something you might want to know if you're interested in the overall property, but if your client or whoever is just interested in that one unit, it's irrelevant information to you, so nothing to be stressed about.
Thank you. Okay, so how do we remove tax liens? Okay, so the easiest way, obviously, to remove a tax lien is to actually pay the taxes that are owed. So that would be the first and foremost. But typically, liens are placed on the property, and the taxpayer receives some type of notice and demand of payment. And then once that notification has been made, the lien is placed, and it will appear in the public record. So this probably does not come to any surprise. You see a lot of these liens when you do your initial title commitment, your title search, and you are provided your title commitment. So again, it could become very timely, and it can slow down the closing process if, in fact, we have to go back to the parties within the transaction and notify them of unpaid taxes or things of this nature that are found. So it can just be timely, and it can be expensive if, in fact, the seller or the property owner is not in a position to actually pay the taxes in full in order for those liens to be removed. To enter into some type of an agreement can take a lot of time, and it can take legal advice, a legal person to actually facilitate that. And so again, it can slow the process down for the conveyance of property from one owner to the other.
And just to elaborate on how this process usually works, the ideal scenario is that someone just pays the taxes, whether that be the owner, whether that be the buyer agreeing to pay the taxes, but I want this much off of the price. All these situations are the most common ones. The more prolonged period of time that taxes have gone unpaid, the more likely you're going to start seeing court cases and settlements instead of just payments. It's very possible for over 3 or more years of time for these taxes to add up to tens of thousands of dollars, if not more. It's not. We've seen cases where there's over $100,000 due on a property in just taxes. Chances are that property is never going to ever change hands unless that's paid. And of course, the problem is nobody's going to pay that. The buyer is not interested enough in any property to pay that amount, and the owner doesn't want to pay it either, or whatever the case is. So most often these will go to court. Usually the county is going to be willing to settle at a much, much, much lower number than what is actually due, because they obviously want the property to be generating value as well, and they want to be getting some taxes from this property. So anything at that point is better than nothing. So generally speaking, it's kind of ironic, but the longer that a property has had its taxes unpaid, the more of a discount you're going to end up paying overall. Someone is going to end up paying overall, I should say.
Absolutely. And so this brings up kind of this other way in which taxes can actually be paid through a tax deed sale. Now, the research that we've done on this, I mean, it is very much a buyer beware type of situation, but typically it's where the tax collector will actually initiate an auction, typically 1 year after the delinquency of the taxes has transpired, will actually go to auction. And then what happens is investors have the opportunity to actually purchase a tax lien certificate or a tax deed certificate. In other words, pay the taxes. It doesn't necessarily mean that ownership of the property changes hands. It simply means that they are in a position to not only receive what they have paid out as far as paying the taxes on their behalf, but also collecting interest and any other fees as a result of eliminating the lien. So it is typically in Florida. What happens though is that the property owner still owns the property first and foremost, and they have up to 2 years to go back and repay those taxes before the investor can then force the sale of that at an auction. So it's a very complicated way in which investors can kind of take advantage of taxes being in arrears. But also they're not completely off the hook in the event that the homeowner or the property owner has the ability to either come back and pay those taxes or negotiate some type of settlement or some type of arrangement. So the other thing in reading a little bit more about this particular topic is that it's very likely that if there are tax liens on the property, there are other types of liens on the property as well. So by not just looking at past due taxes, it's very important that any investor actually do a full title search, as well as, you know, search through the clerk of the court for any of the other types of liens that can be imposed on the property as well before making the decision to go down this road of real estate investing. So what's the trouble with taxes? Well, we all have to pay them. We know that, but also there's also issues can happen, especially for title agents that are issuing insurance, title insurance. This particular instance, Amanda found a great article and she can elaborate here, but it's basically where just the formal name of the property owner was not actually known, or it wasn't disclosed. So just the actual suffix of the name, you know, the third, was left off of the actual tax search, and it resulted in, you know, missing over $100,000 IRS lien that was attached to the property, that then became a huge issue for the title agent when attempting to underwrite the property. Amanda, you want to share how the story came down?
So yeah, basically the issue was a man had the suffix the third in his name, and when he informed the title company about that, they didn't do another search with the suffix and missed this IRS tax lien. So when he went to go and sell again later on down the road, the tax lien was found, and he begrudgingly had to pay that lien in order to sell his property. But then he turned around and filed a claim with the title company. And so it ended up being a problem for the title company because they had to basically figure out how to settle that. And basically the point of the story was that, you know, agents need to be able to consult with their local underwriters for guidance on what control processes to have ready when dealing with federal tax liens. And that was basically the gist of the story, is just to double check your processes, make sure that you are doing the full due diligence when new information comes to light.
Yep, very good. That is a very costly mistake for sure. So this is another issue that does come up on occasion. So what is pin slamming? So pin slamming is basically when a seller may have two pieces of property, two separate parcel ID numbers as part of the overall property address. It could be a property address that has two different PIN numbers, and for whatever reason, the property tax information for both of the components of the overall parcel are not necessarily disclosed. So if this were to happen, the new homeowner basically gets slammed with double property taxes after closing without it being known or disclosed up front. And I know in talking to Jacob, it's not necessarily that this is a malicious thing that happens. A lot of times it is just a mistake. It is just, you know, for lack of a better word, ignorance and not knowing exactly all of the different pieces and components that are actually compiled as part of the overall property.
Yeah, to clarify, I guess it can be malicious too, right? Like it's not impossible for a seller to intentionally hide a parcel from somebody interested in purchasing their home. But if that's the case, the onus falls on whoever is doing the due diligence for this buyer to figure that out and say, hey, there's actually a second parcel on this property. We're going to need documentation for both of these before we come to the table at all. This is exactly why it's so important for anybody entitled to do their due diligence when it comes to ordering your lien searches, ordering your estoppels, ordering your tax certificates. All of that information will point you in this direction. If you do all your research just based on one parcel because the buyer has told you, hey, here's the parcel, Here's our property appraiser for this parcel, etc. That other parcel could be a totally different property appraiser page. It might have the same address, it might not. They could be different addresses too. But if they're all part of this same area, according to the county, that none of that really matters. So it is crucial that due diligence is not skipped for exactly things like this. In most cases, if there's two parcels on a property, especially residential, chances are one of them is going to be the home and one of them is going to be some sort of addition or outside building, like maybe a shed is its own parcel. That happens very commonly, actually, especially in larger areas. But it's possible that theoretically you are doubling what is due on this property. So skipping it is not optional. It's not really optional in order to make sure this is cleared. So I'm sure a lot of you work in title and maybe you've even seen this before, but like Mandy said, it's possible maybe it's a brand new construction or something of that sort, and the person selling it had no clue that there were two parcels. So this is just an example why it's so important for both parties to be very diligent when it comes to their research.
For sure, thank you. So taxes and tax liens attached to the property. So buyers and title professionals must be diligent, right, in finding and resolving tax issues before the real estate transaction. So we know that property taxes specifically have to be addressed before the property can exchange ownership. So a title agent's role in discovering tax issues, if you have been doing this for any length of time, you know exactly what you need to do in order to uncover tax issues. Conducting a title search obviously is the first step in any real estate transaction, and that of course will reveal if there are any taxes or special assessments owed on the property. It will also include the amount of the taxes owed and which taxing authority they are owed to. So we know this is obviously and typically the very first step in uncovering all of the information. So what property information is used to gather the tax information? Here's a lot of different ways in which you can search for the tax information: the legal description of the property, property ownership history, the tax history, and of course the current homeowner, going back to verifying the actual full name of the current homeowner certainly will help in making sure that you're identifying the property correctly.
Another important one here for property information is obviously the parcel, the property ID, whatever it's called in that specific area, the one unique number identifier that follows a property. Sometimes this will be the same as a tax ID, sometimes it's different. I won't go into much detail about that, but basically the parcel is very important here. It's also somewhat common, at least in our experience, for a parcel to have changed in a rather short amount of time. Like maybe in 2020, this property or this address was under this parcel, and in 2021 it has now been split or it has been remapped or something has happened, so it's under a completely different parcel now. If you fail to search that new parcel, you're going to miss the new tax information. So anything that is relevant for 2021 will not be present in your research. If you only search the previous parcel, you're going to see everything is being paid, or you might notice that the taxes go up to 2019 and just stop, which wouldn't make any sense either. That should obviously be a flag to you that something has changed with that property's information. So again, just crucial that you know everything. You verify all this really basic information about a property before you do anything else. That's where honestly most mistakes with research happen, is when the fundamentals are not cared for.
Right, and so there's lots of different places that you can look for tax information, right? So the public record, any recorded land survey that may be on file has information as well. The county property tax collector or assessor's office certainly has the information. The clerk of the court, the county property appraiser's office, and of course, by doing your title search, the information is found in the title plans as well. So what is a tax certificate? So we're going to talk, we talked a little bit about the tax lien certificate and the tax deed certificate and how those are government issued certificates when investors buy out the liens, right? We have a lot of confusion or a lot of different ways in which this term is used in the industry. And so basically, just to be clear, a tax certificate is nothing more than a tax report, okay? It's a tax report detailing the individual taxing authority's information on the property. It provides a comprehensive description of the assessed value of the property, taxes that are imposed, and any exemptions that apply. So typically, and we can talk a little bit more about this in just a second, but typically when in the state of Florida, the tax information is just one piece of a full comprehensive municipal lien search, right? So that is, you will get tax information by conducting a municipal lien search, as well as checking the local property appraiser's office as well. But if you're strictly looking for tax information only, maybe say for instance, like for a refi, and the other information is irrelevant because the property is not changing hands, then just a basic tax certificate would be all that you would need in order to satisfy a refi. So again, a tax deed certificate or a tax lien certificate that we talked about is in this context is not a tax certificate. It is a government issued document that's used to initiate the tax deed sale or to grant the right to collect interest on the delinquent property taxes. So it's a whole different document. It's a whole different piece of a documentation that is issued when a property is going through a tax deed sale initiative. Separate from just a tax certificate, which is simply nothing more than just the tax report. So why does a home buyer need a tax certificate? Well, there's a lot of reasons why everyone obviously needs a tax certificate or a tax report, basically to determine what taxes that they will need to pay at closing, to verify the taxing districts that the property is located in, to verify which municipal utility providers are paid through property taxes. Now, this may or may not apply, and that's the reason why you may or may not see municipality utilities listed on taxes. You may find them just by doing a municipal lien search as well. Also, to uncover any debt owed to a municipality that may not be recorded as a lien yet. And then, of course, to show any tax liens on the property as well. So lots of really good information that is necessary for the buyer to be fully aware of the implications that property taxes are going to have on purchasing that particular property, and if there are any issues that need to be resolved prior to closing by the seller. The other thing, yeah, too, I just saw on the bottom of the thing too. So it could also be very important that once you do a title search or on the property, if there's any indication on the schedule, on the B1 schedule of the title commitment, obviously it's going to require that a tax research be done as well. I know a lot of people see or know, in the state of Florida, tax certificates, like I said, are not necessarily like a primary service that we offer, but we do offer it specifically to other states that utilize the services. And this is just an example of how some of the different real estate contracts use this language in different ways. So, for example, in Texas, for instance, it's going to state that, the release of any liens as it relates to tax statements or certificates. We're showing you this as just simply as an example of how the word tax certificates can be used, and to understand and know the connotation of utilizing that term. So what information is on a tax certificate? So again, property details, the tax collector name and the address, all county, municipal, and school fees that may be located there, current tax year details, any delinquent taxes from the previous years. You'll find all of this information on the tax certificate or the tax report. So when does a home buyer need a tax certificate? So again, we've talked a little bit about, asking the different questions to just determine if in fact a tax certificate needs to be generated. So does the state, county, and or local municipality bill utilities through the property taxes? If so, then yes, a separate tax certificate would be necessary to be generated so that you could see and determine the municipality utilities in addition to the property taxes, as they are all combined under one report. Does the state enforce code violations through tax liens? If you live in a state that does, then yes, you would actually need to do a tax search as well, but this is where you're going to find code enforcement violations or code enforcement liens that you may miss if they are not currently recorded with the local clerk of the court. So it's important that you search in both locations. And then again, does the lender actually require a separate tax search on the property? And typically, if a lender requires it, then yes, a tax certificate search in addition to a municipal lien search may be necessary in order to uncover all of the various details of the due diligence as part of closing on the property.
We personally at PropLogix, we have a great number of clients that order lien searches, tax certs, and estoppels all at the same time. They'll just order all three of those products for a particular property. One of the reasons that a lot of clients will order a tax certificate, even if it's not required, is because of generally how inexpensive they are. Usually it's not very expensive to receive one of these from, even if not us, from other companies as well that compete with us that provide very similar services. It's usually a rather inexpensive product. And given how much of a safety net it could potentially provide you when making any sort of transaction on a property, usually it's pretty obvious how much value that could be for you. So you pay, I don't know, anywhere from $20 to $55, wherever, or even less in some cases, for a document that could save you a lot of stress down the line. It becomes pretty clear why it's ordered all the time. We also offer like multiple types of that same product depending on what kind of information you actually need or what's being required of you. So maybe you don't actually want full property tax information. You just want the really basic stuff. You want to know what the assessed value is. You want to know whether anything's due or not, what the current year taxes are. There's products specifically for that. Or maybe you want everything for the past 3 years. You want to know the detail of every exemption. You want to know the detail of every what could happen if that exemption is removed, what the taxes would be then. Many places, including us, will provide a report that details that instead. So the amount of flexibility that you are usually that is usually available to you when it comes to tax certificates and tax reports is pretty immense. And usually places, including us, will bend whatever we need to in order to make our product fit your needs. So
absolutely. And like I said, sometimes it's just, in addition to a comprehensive municipal lien search, it's just one more report providing you as much information as possible to make sure that you don't miss any of the key pieces.
And I've got a pretty relevant question right now from Barbara that I'd like to just touch on and make sure that we get to it. Maybe you can just kind of drill down a little bit more into when it's needed. She's asking, so if I'm getting the status of taxes on a title commitment, do I also need a tax report run by PropLogix as well?
I'd say it certainly depends. In most cases, probably not. Chances are you are not going to need one unless you want one and you would like some extra documentation, some extra confidence that you are the taxes are under control, so to speak. But in most cases, no. Like we touched on a little bit earlier, that's why the bulk of our clients order them for refinances, not for sales. Chances are, if you are getting a title commitment, you probably do not need that product. If you are not getting a title commitment, though, and you're engaging in any sort of property transaction, you should absolutely be looking into getting a tax certificate. But if you've ordered a full title commitment and everything checks out, you're probably okay.
And in this instance too, again, so, cash deals don't require, just as they don't require title insurance, even though we obviously recommend very highly that anyone purchasing property actually purchase title insurance as well. But the buyer, would just know that they would be taking on any potential liability should they purchase property without confirming any tax debt that may be tied to the property. So that, in a nutshell, is just some great, I think, tips and information about different places that you can look for tax information. Just a quick reminder to everyone that to look at all of the levels of detail on the information about the parcel ID, the property owner detail information, parcel ID numbers, all of that level of granular detail is going to ensure that you are pulling up and uncovering any potential tax liens or prior taxes that haven't been paid. It really is a way to protect both buyers and sellers throughout the whole conveyance of property throughout the transaction. So hopefully that those of you that may be new to the industry, you learned a little something, and hopefully those that have been doing this for 100 years, maybe it was just a great reminder to go back and make sure that you're dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's as you are representing buyers and sellers in real estate transactions. So thank you very much for taking time out of the day today. And other than that one question, I don't know, do we have any other questions? I think we've got a few minutes.
Yep, we've got about 9 minutes left. So we've got a couple of questions that came rolling in. And if you have anything else that you'd like to ask, please be sure to add in your question now. So we have one question from Olivia. She's asking for the pin slamming. Would the contract be the determining factor? Usually the FAR bar contract lists the pens. I don't know if either of you have insight into that, but I can say that as far as this particular issue, I have not read about it happening in Florida. It is definitely a unique issue that happens in very particular areas. And in this case, the particular story that I read about, it was a big issue for a subdivision outside of the city of Chicago. And one woman, she essentially bought this home. She found out after closing on the property that she was actually delinquent in some taxes because she was not even aware of that additional parcel. And it was not brought to her attention until after a while after closing. And so I haven't heard of this happening in any place outside of Illinois, outside of that particular area. So it is a very unique situation, but I don't know if Jacob or Mandy, if you have anything to add about, determining factors or figuring out if that's an issue.
To be honest with you, I would not. Do not have enough experience on that end of the transaction to be confidently giving you an answer. I'm really not quite sure. I would say normally maybe it will fall on the contract, but it's really up to the county in most cases what the result of that is going to be, whether the new homeowner owes that or whether they're allowed to make the case for their ignorance or that they were, wrongfully done in the transaction, and then the onus falls on another individual or perhaps no one. But I would say that that's usually up to the county completely.
Okay, and then we've also got a question going back to non-ad valorem taxes. Even though non-ad valorem taxes are on the property tax bill, is it on a different cycle from the ad valorem taxes?
Good question. Usually no. I suppose there's exceptions to this, but in our experience, no. They're usually included in however you normally pay your taxes. So if you pay them quarterly, you're probably just going to see non-ad valorems added to your quarterly bill. If you pay them annually, you're probably just going to see them added to your annual bill. It's exceptionally rare for them to be any sort of separate tax. It's harder for the county to do that, obviously, to keep track of two different types of taxes coming for your property. So they'd prefer to just have it all in one bill as well. So in most cases, no, I have never seen an instance where non-ad valorem taxes are on a completely separate cycle than the normal property taxes.
And we've got a question here about, it looks like the tax deed sales. What is the process of the tax sale after the taxes have been paid by an investor and the owner has not paid any taxes for the 2-year period? Do either of you have any insight on that?
Well, just what I was able to uncover is that they have at least 2 years to actually collect taxes from the property owner. After 2 years, the investor can basically force an auction in order for him to be able to have his tax deed or tax lien certificate satisfied. So at that point, then he can go back and then actually force the sale of the property. There's another way in which it can also be done where they can request a quiet title to actually be transferred. And typically this is, again, this is going to the court. This is actually a process that is an investment in order to obtain quiet title. And one of the things that that happens is that's typically necessary, or full transfer of title needs to happen before an underwriter is willing to underwrite title insurance on a property. So typically it's going to be very difficult to have an underwriter underwrite on a property that has a tax deed lien or a tax lien on the property. So again, it's at least 2 years, 2.5 years, and at that point they can go back and request a forced sale of the property. It is based on the knowledge that or the information that I was able to find on the subject. And it happens. This is huge. This is just a very common way in which investors actually compile large, sections of property. They will, they'll put together these huge deals where they'll go after, multiple parcels all at the same time over a course of many years, obtaining these lien certificates and then compiling it and then selling off those large land deals as a huge, as a huge way in which they do business. But it's very tricky. And it's very risky to do if you are not in a position to, to take the financial risk. It's certainly not something that for anyone that isn't, aware or know how to do it, professionally, it's a very tricky thing to get involved in. But yeah, it's, at least a minimum of 2 years to give that property owner the right to redeem. It's called the redeemable time period in order for that to come back and take full ownership again. So there's lots of good information out on the internet. If you come across anyone, this has happened quite frequently here in the North Florida area, and I don't know if it's just because we have just a lot of property for sale currently, the commercial side of things as well. So, there's a lot of really good information available out there, and, is something that I would just consult, a professional to help you navigate through this. We just tell any investors that call or ask for title search information or information that they're about to go to auction. Can you help me uncover this information before I go to auction and purchase this property on auction? It's just not, it's not something that they should do without at least, doing these searches ahead of time to determine if there are any tax liens and so forth. So it's tricky. It's very much tricky. It's something that, definitely to get a professional advisor to help navigate or to help best, advise a consumer that's interested in going down this road.
And real quick before we finish up, I did just want to echo a couple of comments that came in regarding the non-ad valorem and ad valorem, is that in some cases, the different cycles, it is important for prorating, and that it can be on the same bill but have different cycles. So that's something to keep in mind. So I just wanted to share that with everyone to make sure that they're aware of that. And as Jacob said, it can always depend on the area that you're in, what those cycles look like. So with that said, I just want to remind everyone that there will be a follow-up email. The presentation today, the slide deck, will be in that email. So if you'd like to take a look at that again, share it with any of your colleagues, that will be in the email in the follow-up. We'll also have a link to the replay of the webinar that you can share as well as that important form that we need title agents to sign and return to education@proplogix.com in order to get your credit. And again, for Florida attorneys, be sure to go to the Florida Bar website to report your course today. And the number there is on the screen for you. And then just want to let everyone know, if you'd like to learn more about our continuing education courses, you can go over to our website, proplogix.com. I'll also have that link in the email as well, and you can get in touch with Mandy and see about coordinating a continuing education course for the real estate agents that you work with. Again, I just want to say thank you to everyone. We appreciate your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for participating. It's nice to have you.
Have a great
Have a
day,
good day.
everyone.